The other aspect of this review, I just wanted to read some of these facts out because they're pretty disturbing, and it doesn't just, it's not so much applying to the Wallum site. This is across New South Wales because we're talking about New South Wales legislation. So more than 30% of original native vegetation in New South Wales has been substantially altered and destroyed.
954 threatened species and 111 threatened ecological communities are currently listed in New South Wales.
Which means they're heading to extinction. And you can't replace something once it's gone.
72 species are extinct in New South Wales, including 25 mammals. And I think when we compiled the data last night of all of the reports and all of the threatened species, there's 22 mammals, I think, from memory, on site. About half of those were bats.
Less than 10% in New South Wales grassy woodlands remain. And the pests and weeds threaten over 70% of vulnerable species because both noxious weeds and feral animals outcompete our native animals and plants.
And it's another sad effect, of course, of residential developments next to high ecological value bushland and areas of heathland in this instance, is that there's always an edge effect on those ecological communities, and so there's impacts that will happen just because of that development. That can be around urbanisation, rubbish and domestic pets, but there's also ecological effects that happen.
And over 73% of migratory birds have declined in Australia. So I just wanted to go briefly through some of the principles of the Biodiversity Conservation Act, which is what is meant to protect our threatened species that are heading to extinction. So the review panel found that the principal provisions of this Act and the delivery is deficient for the following reasons. The Act's objectives lack primacy and are undermined by a range of other legislation, particularly planning law legislation. The effectiveness of the Act to restore, conserve and enhance biodiversity is limited. There's very limited data collected on the effectiveness of the Act. There's very little capacity to evaluate whether the Act and the Biodiversity Offset Scheme are meeting the objectives of the Act. The key programs are limited in scope, under-resourced, and lack sufficient monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. The Biodiversity Conservation Panel is underutilised. The involvement of Aboriginal people in program design and on-ground implementation is not developed or enhanced. There is a need to recognise the intricate relationship between biodiversity and Aboriginal culture, embedded in Aboriginal participation in these processes at all levels: advisory, decision-making, implementation and delivery. The Act does not adequately recognise the rights, culture and economic aspirations of Aboriginal communities and people.